Kia ora koutou. My name is Valerie Love, and I am the Senior Digital Archivist at the Alexander Turnbull Library, which holds the archives and special collections for the National Library of New Zealand. I'm queer and non-binary, and my pronouns are she, they.
Kia ora koutou, namaste. I'm Ashwinee Pendharkar, the inaugural Curator, Contemporary Voices and Archives at Alexander Turnbull Library. My pronouns are she, her.
So Ashwinee and I are going to speak about the library's process to acquire and preserve the PrideNZ collection. And we're also going to talk about how it connects to other LGBTQIA collections at the Turnbull Library and community materials. But before we begin, I did just want to note that there's no one term that really covers the breadth and the width of and nuances of the LGBTQIA plus and rainbow communities and identities. So you'll hear us using various terms throughout the presentation. We're going to begin the talk by giving you, there we go, there's the agenda slide. We're going to begin the presentation by giving you just a little taste of the types of audio recordings and lived experiences that are in the collection, and be aware that the first clip does contain coarse language. And then after that, Ashwinee will introduce the Contemporary Voices curatorial area, and we'll have a short video from Gareth Watkins, the founder of PrideNZ, about the collection. We'll then talk about the library's work with PrideNZ to acquire, process, and preserve the collection. And finally, Ashwinee will provide some closing remarks. So up first is some audio and photographs from PrideNZ.
If you're different, you don't go near a policeman because they're God unto themselves. You know, there's one here that used to arrest me nearly every night of the week. He'd say, get in the car. And I'd say, but I've done nothing wrong. He'd say, get in the car. I'd say, I've done nothing wrong. If you don't get in the car, I'll have you up for hampering a policeman in his line of duty. And he'd be abusing me, calling me a shirt lifter, which I didn't even know what it meant, a poo pusher. And he'd push my face and push it and push it and push it into the window until I said, fuck off, or pig or something. He'd go, gotcha. And arrest it. And say, arrest it. You know, that's what they called you, it. Arrest the thing.
My identity is such a big part of who I am, and we experience so much sadness around how we're treated for that. But today we can just experience this joy and be around people that are safe and that are kind and that are really accepting, and we can really feel that pride in who we are. So they're coming towards us now, and it's looking amazing. There's so many different colours and so many different people. I'm seeing signs that say, we exist, get over it. I'm seeing people cheering. Yeah, there's a lot of cheering. I'm seeing disabled and proud Takatāpui. I'm seeing so much rainbows and so many happy people. We've got all different ages of people and all different types of people, and it's looking really amazing. We've got this gorgeous glitter signs coming towards us and some beautiful young people. This is just absolutely gorgeous. Everyone looks so happy.
Contemporary Voices and Archives, CVA henceforward, is the newest curatorial area of the Alexander Turnbull Library. It was established in 2021 on the cusp of the library's first 100 years and the next, in recognition of the need for a diverse and inclusive documentary heritage representing all New Zealanders. As the inaugural curator of CVA, I have been instrumental in giving form to this nebulous vision by proactively ensuring focus on cultural identities, communities, events, concerns, and formats thus far marginalized and underrepresented. CVA's newly live collecting plan is a dynamic blueprint of this vision. This plan and CVA's collecting practice are shaped by the awareness that our vast collections covering a wide range of times and formats, do not have much or anything at all about certain aspects of our history and from certain communities and people amongst us. The key word here is from, because the little that we do have in our collection is on or about these communities. Individuals from these communities are unfindable as narrators of their own stories and equally likely to be missing as donors, auctioneers, vendors, users, researchers, and visitors. We are certainly not unique or alone in this predicament. There are some acknowledged gaps and silences that we share with other archives and special collections across the world. Women, disabled people, queer communities, migrant communities, the disenfranchised, and those on the fringes of the accepted norms of society all fall in this category. Similarly universal is the underrepresentation of the diversity within these communities and the intersectionality of people who belong to multiple different communities simultaneously and those that identify with multiple ethnicities and cultures. Since its inception, CVA has worked on building significant connections with individuals, groups, and organizations identifying with and representing diverse identities, faiths, ethnicities, and intersections thereof. CVA's work is predicated on three foundational beliefs: connections before collections, bridges rather than walls, working with rather than on communities. The intention is to break down the barriers between community organizations and national institutions. The key priority for CVA is to keep the focus on stories, histories, issues, and concerns of importance to the marginalized communities themselves, and on materials representing significant or unique contributions that individuals and groups from these communities have made to Aotearoa New Zealand society. PrideNZ collection is of great significance from this perspective. The Community Archives movement has enhanced awareness of the value of archives of the communities on the margins of the society and of the significance of the stories and histories that remain excluded from and neglected by mainstream repositories. The movement advocates for the right of the communities to own and keep their own history. The underlying resistance is to the current models of custody and ownership reflecting colonial hierarchies and the power dynamics inherent to them. However, the independence so desired by community archives is often threatened by factions within the communities and also likely to lead to penury and precarity. Equally importantly, the separation between community and national heritage institutions reinforces and perpetuates the current binary pitching us versus them. I firmly believe that the true potential for change resides in the dialogue that happens when the collections representing the two sides of the power equation live and are visible side by side in one repository. If the stories of the marginalized communities are to truly become part of a nation's fabric, belong in a nation's history, we need them right alongside the collections traditionally considered central, so that they can question and challenge the predominant practices in collection building and the standards of archival processes like appraisal and description from within the same spaces, forcing the institutions to reflect upon, rethink, and change current practices. Aspirational? Yes, and also positively possible concrete reality, as our work with PrideNZ demonstrates.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Gareth Watkins, the founder of PrideNZ.com. PrideNZ is a privately funded community website based in Wellington, New Zealand. The website was launched in 2009 and now contains over 900 audio recordings of interviews and local community events showcasing the stories and opinions of New Zealand's LGBT+ rainbow communities. While the earliest recordings date back to the 1990s, some of the content goes back even further, with some interviewees remembering growing up in the 1940s and 1950s. PrideNZ wouldn't exist without community support. There have been hundreds of interviewees from the community telling their own stories, as well as event organisers allowing their events to be recorded and shared. The website has 3 aims.
1. To capture a sense of rainbow lives through audio interviews and event recordings.
The PrideNZ collection is not only seen as a treasure today, but will also become a touchstone for generations to come. It's going to allow for people to hear who we were, how we spoke, what our dreams and our aspirations were.
2. To make those recordings easily accessible to the public.
PrideNZ is about open, immediate dissemination of content. We don't embargo or limit access to material.
3. To help save rainbow heritage by making the collection available to archives in the future.
PrideNZ has never seen itself as a permanent, forever archive. We simply don't have the people or digital infrastructure or finance to do this. So as the years have gone by with more and more significant content being recorded, the responsibility of preserving these voices has weighed heavily. PrideNZ's approach to archiving has been to make sure that the collection is in multiple locations, both internationally and in New Zealand. We began sending PrideNZ to the Internet Archive for snapshotting. In 2019, to make sure high-resolution versions of the audio were being archived, we added high-quality MP3s to the website. And then a year later, to increase discoverability, we added computer-generated transcriptions of the audio. In 2021, the Library of Congress took a snapshot of the website, and this then prompted a discussion with the National Library of New Zealand about depositing the master recordings. Accruals to the collection are continuing, with around 5 new recordings being deposited every month. The National Library deposit also prompted PrideNZ to develop and release a number of datasets under a Creative Commons license. Now anyone can download detailed metadata about the collection, along with a dataset of geo-referenced locations relating to rainbow communities. While it's beneficial having the audio in multiple institutions, there are real significant benefits in having the National Library of New Zealand as the primary long-term repository. The National Library has the most robust infrastructure for managing cultural digital collections in New Zealand. It has a dedicated team committed to managing files in perpetuity. Through an explicit wording in the deposit agreement and an ongoing face-to-face relationship with PrideNZ, the library understands and is committed to upholding the original intent of the website and participants, that is, open, free access to the content. The arrangement and description teams at the National Library have professionally described the collection at item level, allowing for greater discoverability and linking to other collections. It was really important for PrideNZ to have the collection in an institution that cared equally for all of the diverse voices and opinions expressed in the recordings. And finally, PrideNZ believes it's important for heritage institutions, particularly heritage institutions funded by the state, to represent the diversity of experiences and voices in the country. Having the PrideNZ collection preserved by the National Library of New Zealand shows a tangible commitment from the state to honour the experiences of rainbow communities in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
So I'm going to speak about the library's process to acquire and preserve the PrideNZ collection and how it connects to other LGBTQ+ library collections and community materials. So when the Library of Congress began archiving the PrideNZ website, PrideNZ posted about it on Facebook. And the story was then picked up by Radio New Zealand and other media here. In the Facebook post, Gareth wrote, "I was taken completely by surprise when we received the notification. This is the first time a collecting institution has approached PrideNZ to archive its content, and it is notable and perhaps sadly telling that the request has actually come from outside Aotearoa." Excuse me. So Gareth's point was entirely valid. it was the first time that a collecting institution had contacted him about archiving the PrideNZ site. However, the web archiving team at the National Library of New Zealand had in fact been harvesting the site since 2011 under the library's legal deposit mandate, and that is to collect and preserve all published content in Aotearoa, New Zealand, including websites. But unlike the Library of Congress, we hadn't actually notified PrideNZ of that. So the PrideNZ Facebook post made me realize that we at the National Library had a bit of a communications issue. After bringing the Facebook post to the attention of colleagues and discussing the situation, we decided it made sense to reach out to Gareth and PrideNZ directly. And to be honest, I was a bit nervous about this and how Gareth might respond to being told that the library had, unbeknownst to him, been harvesting the site for about 10 years. But Gareth was incredibly gracious and genuinely pleased to hear that the library was archiving the site, and better yet, he was interested in working with us more closely. When Ashwinee and I met together with Gareth the following week, we learned that the website was just one part of what PrideNZ held. In addition to the MP3 recordings available on the website, there were also over 800 original WAV format recordings, ranging from just a few minutes in length to several hours long, plus release forms, printed ephemera, and also a large amount of digital photography from events that PrideNZ had recorded, along with event programs. And because Gareth is a glam professional himself, there was meticulously recorded and compiled metadata about the collection and its contents. Now, as many of you will know, the Alexander Turnbull Library is also home to LGBTI, the Lesbian and Gay Archives of New Zealand, which has recently in the process of changing its name. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the new name, but at the time I wrote this, it was still LGBTI. LGBTI was founded in 1977 as part of the National Gay Rights Coalition and was later known as the Lesbian and Gay Rights Resource Center. In September 1986, shortly after the passing of homosexual law reform, 2 men broke into the Resource Center and tried to set the archive on fire. Fortunately, most of the collections survived the fire and were evacuated and stored initially in volunteers' garages and then at the Alexander Turnbull Library for safekeeping. In 1988, a formal agreement was announced to house those collections permanently within Turnbull Library, and the collection was renamed as the Lesbian and Gay Archives of New Zealand. However, the LGBTI collections would remain an independent collection owned by a trust board operating on behalf of the community. And to this day, LGBTI is an autonomous archive physically housed within the secure walls of the Alexander Turnbull Library in the National Library of New Zealand. And LGBTI is actively collecting material documenting rainbow communities in Aotearoa. So when Ashwinee and I first wrote up the acquisition approval documentation for the PrideNZ collection, one of the first questions that we had to address from the library leadership was, well, why ATL and why not LGBTI? Now, Gareth has already provided his own reasons for wanting the PrideNZ material to be held at the library, but the library does receive a large number of collection offers, and we can only accept a small fraction of those. So we had to make the case. Why this collection and why us? In the past, the Turnbull Library hadn't always collected a lot of LGBTQIA+ archival material because it didn't want to be seen as competing with LGBTI. However, this relatively hands-off approach to queer collecting posed its own issues. What does it say about our national heritage collection if there's minimal coverage of queer communities as part of that? Additionally, LGBTI as a community archive has the same difficulties of long-term sustainability that PrideNZ does. They're both volunteer-run and have limited resources in terms of funding, whereas the National Library has resources and digital infrastructure already in place to preserve born digital collections. And the library had an official signing of the deed of gift and transfer to the library of the material in April 2022. Now, the collection was delivered on a Mac formatted hard drive with the 818 sound recordings totaling 155 gigabytes, as well as the accompanying metadata provided by a spreadsheet. And we undertook our normal technical appraisal process to right-block the drive, run a virus scan, run Droid, a file format identification tool developed by the National Archives in the UK. We generated a file list and checksums for each file, copied the hard drive to the library's secure pre-deposit collection server, and then had our AV technicians take a closer look at the audio recordings themselves to assess bit rate and document any recording discrepancies, such as interruptions in the recordings or background noise or uneven audio channels. Once the technical appraisal and content appraisal had been completed, the PrideNZ recordings and supporting materials were formally accessioned into the library's collections. And the Turnbull Library's arrangement and description team worked to process the collection, taking the provided metadata and creating an import spreadsheet to allow us to bulk create individual item records in our cataloging system, EMU. The original metadata spreadsheets for PrideNZ were also retained as actual collection items in and of themselves. Now, unsurprisingly, there were a few discrepancies between the format and the structure of the PrideNZ metadata and the library's own descriptive fields in practice. The main challenge was that the PrideNZ data included tags for interview topics and the ways that interviewees chose to self-identify. Now, Turnbull Library relies on controlled authority terms, and most frequently Library of Congress subject headings. Now, unfortunately, these don't keep pace with changing terminology used within communities. Now, coincidentally, around the same time, the library was already thinking about some of the outdated terminology in our catalog records, particularly in regards to Māori and other historically underrepresented communities. The library's authority review group had already been having conversations about a metadata refresh to be more inclusive, and the possibility of implementing the Homosaurus, an international LGBTQ plus linked data vocabulary, as an additional controlled vocabulary source in our collections database. And this would provide the library with the ability to use authority terms that were more inclusive and that were actually developed by rainbow communities about rainbow communities, including terms like Takatāpui for Māori queer people. My colleague Emma Roach has written a great blog post about this on the National Library's blog, and I do encourage you to have a read if you haven't already. So we were really lucky with the timing of the accession of the PrideNZ collection because it meant that it was able to be one of the first collections that would be described using the Homosaurus controlled vocabulary terms. The collection itself was arranged to mirror the structure of the PrideNZ website, with broad categories for its recordings, such as events and arts and media, individual life experiences, and topics such as homosexual law reform, civil unions, HIV/AIDS, conversion practices, marriage equality, and much more. But there was still the challenge of reconciling the PrideNZ subject tags with authority terms, even the more inclusive ones. As each recording included a large number of tags, we decided to put the tags into the item scope and contents notes so they'd be findable via a keyword search on the library's catalog, rather than trying to harmonize them with the corresponding Library of Congress subject heading or even a Homosaurus authority term. And the arrangement and description staff then added more subject terms at the series and sub-series level with general themes and topics. Our standard ingest tool would allow us to easily load the digital files into Rosetta, our digital preservation system. However, they would still need to be manually linked to their corresponding descriptive record. Due to the scale of the collection, which was nearly 900 recordings at this point, we needed to be able to develop an automated process to do this linking. And the library's digital preservation research and consultancy team took up the challenge. Thank goodness. So they were able to develop a bulk ingest process for unpublished born digital collections. And essentially what they did was they wrote a script that could take a spreadsheet with the file names, file path, what record they corresponded to in the cataloging system, and the other metadata to automatically link that digital file to their descriptive record at the time of ingest, rather than doing it manually within the Rosetta workbench as a separate step. And best of all, the workflow is adaptable, so we're able to use it with other large born digital collections, which makes our processing team very happy. And before I hand over back to Ashwinee, I'm just going to give you the latest update, which I got from Gareth today, which is to let you know that PrideNZ have refreshed all of the AI transcripts that he mentioned in the video and have added a few more data sets in order to make the collection even more accessible to generative AI. If you Google PrideNZ and then artificial intelligence for good, you can find out all the information about what they're currently doing. They've been a long adapter of AI practices in terms of increasing the accessibility. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Ashwinee for some closing remarks.
As you see from some of the details Gareth and Val have shared, the beginning of the conversation between PrideNZ and the National Library was awkward. Credit to all involved, the conversation did not stall. Both sides were fully aware of this collection's significance to the history of the queer communities in New Zealand and of that history to New Zealand. We realized we wanted the same outcome, preservation of PrideNZ, and in that case were on the same side, looking at and working on the problems together. In expressing their disappointment at not being approached by national repositories in New Zealand, PrideNZ held us accountable and reminded us of the need to do more than what we were doing to preserve their record. The point is, communities are not powerless. They can and should ask and take the institutions to task. The point also is that these conversations can be difficult and might start awkward, but they do not need to remain or end so. In this case, the result is a strong collaboration of mutual advantage, upholding the highest professional standards and setting benchmarks for best practices. The advantages are not limited to ATL acquiring a significant collection, CVA fulfilling one of its key priorities, or PrideNZ securing preservation in perpetuity, as important as these are. As Gareth and Val show, the collaboration has built an ongoing and lasting relationship between PrideNZ and ATL. The fine-tuning of processes of sharing information, metadata, and digital content have added to the existing knowledge base and will inform future practice at ATL. The institutional practices in description are forever enhanced by the step taken to use Homosaurus and thereby respect the current shifts in language usage led by queer communities themselves. Another highlight is the deed of gift. With preservation comes the need to think about access, use, and reuse in creation of new knowledge. The deed clearly conveys Gareth's instructions as donor regarding how the rights and desires of the community are to be respected, as well as how access and use are to be handled in the future. Gareth brought deep knowledge of the way hegemonic social norms and external factors could threaten the communities and individual members' rights and wishes. ATL brought institutional perspective and expertise to the process. We worked together to ensure the deed reflects Gareth's wishes as the donor, the needs and rights of the participants, as well as the institution's mandate to look after the collection in perpetuity, provide access to the materials, and also documenting the steps taken and decisions made for those who would replace us all in the future. When we are dealing with perpetuity, future is a presence we cannot ignore. My connection with this project is different from Gareth and Val. I do not belong to or identify with the rainbow community that PrideNZ represents. I firmly believe that that does not and should not matter. The work of making our cultural and documentary heritage more diverse and inclusive is urgent. The need to do so universal, and the onus on us all. Individuals, communities, professionals, academics, and institutions. The work and the community should not have to wait until each community has a representative in relevant roles within heritage institutions. It should be possible and valid to do this work without belonging to specific communities. There is a pressing need for diversity across the sector in roles such as curators, archivists, and other heritage professionals. And the sector needs to open up to professionals from all communities. However, while communities remain excluded from representation within collections and histories, Lived experience rooted in belonging to each specific community remains a nice to have. Lived experience of marginalization as a common thread and point of connection, helpful. Understanding, respect, and the desire to make a difference, essential. Nami Hinui. Namaste.
I'm afraid we're right out of time. We should all be moving on to the next talk, or if you're on 6B, you can stay in this room.